Join me for some fun hip flexor strengthening exercises. Grab a band and join me on your back for some dead bugs with hip flexion. These are such a great way to work both the glute max and your hip flexors while working your abs in more of that dead bug position. So you're holding your pelvis nice and still, really using those low abs to anchor your pelvis. And then as you pull the band up, you're getting hip flexion, and as you push your leg down, you are getting lots of great glute max for that hip extension. So utilizing a band here for these type of dead bugs are going to give you both more hip flexor resistance and glute max resistance. For banded hands and knees hip flexion, grab a band. I like to hook one of those circle bands onto a handle because then it really sticks to my foot well and doesn't come off. You're going to go into hands and knees, really thinking about relaxing your neck, pushing through with your serratus, and then pull that hip flexor up. I like to add a little bit of trunk flexion here, so I'm getting abs along with hip flexor. If you get any popping in this particular position, then it probably means that your femur is turning into internal external rotation. So try to take a second and look down at your leg and make sure your femur stays in slight external rotation here. That should eliminate that popping, and this should feel really good for hip flexor and ab work. Grab a band and join me for resisted hip flexion. Now, if you have a fairly light band, you're going to be able to lift really high. And the most important thing I want you to think about here is I want you to think about not hiking your hip. You're going to hold your hip up just a little bit to clear the ground, but you're not going to hike it way up. You're going to try to keep your hips as even as possible, not hiking as you lift. So if you use a thicker band, you're not going to be able to lift quite as high, and that's going to give you a little bit less hip flexion range for the amount of weight of the band. So if you have a little bit of hip impingement, maybe you don't want to go into a lot of hip flexion, then you can use a heavier band so you're not able to lift quite as high, but you're able to get a good amount of resistance. Grab a foam roller and join me for an isometric hip flexor exercise where we are really getting a lot of tibialis anterior. I actually love this exercise because I love the isometric hold. You can hold for a count of 3 to 5 or even all the way up to 30 seconds and work on nice deep breaths, your core contraction. I love getting a little lat engagement here as well. But I find this can really work that kinetic chain for tibialis anterior and hip flexion and really give you a tremendous amount of core too as you kick in those lats, pushing down on that roller, giving you that awesome isometric contraction that is strengthening those hip flexors. And if you want a little more psoas, angle that knee out just a pinch. This is probably the hip flexor exercise that I personally use the most because I love the equal resistance through the entire range of motion. Anytime you use a band, you're going to have more resistance at the top, but lifting a kettlebell with your foot is giving you the same resistance over the entire range. Now, I love this because we are able to really work on our balance, as you can see, along with our hip flexor strength. And so you're going to work opposite leg glute medius to hold you in place. And the thing I want you to really think about is not letting your hip hike. So the leg that you're lifting, you're thinking about scooping that hip, activating that hip flexor, but not letting the hip hike up, because then that's going to give you a lot of back and tension through that QL.